What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Lions video. Now, the other day, I believe it was Tuesday night, I was watching Luke G's Field Review. I was watching his Lions talk where he was talking about the Detroit Lions wide receiver core. And that got me thinking. He was talking about the wide receiver core, talking about all the slander they'd got before, once Calvin Johnson retired, stuff like that. It was a really good podcast, really good show. Go watch it if you have not already. You will be entertained and you will have a lot of fun watching it. But it got me thinking, why is it that the Detroit Lions have had such a big narrative this offseason? Why is it that the Detroit Lions are being slandered for having the worst wide receiver core in the NFL? And is it really as big of a problem as many people think it is? Was it really worth all the different speculation and all the different sayings like, and all the different things coming out? Oh, the Lions need to draft a wide receiver at 7. The Lions need to spend big in free agency on a wide receiver. The Lions have the worst wide receiver core in the NFL. They're not going to be good because they don't have a true big alpha X wide receiver. Is all of that true, and how detrimental is this wide receiver core really going to be for the Detroit Lions? Well, today I wanted to talk about it. Today I want to go in depth, talk about the receiving core last year, talk about the changes that were made, talk about the adjustments, and talk about really the wide receiver core in general and how good or bad it will be in 2021. So with all that being said, without any further ado, let's get right into talking about this wide receiver core and talk about, is it really as big of a problem or as big of an issue as a lot of people would have you believe?
So we get Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah!
Now, if you were to look at the Detroit Lions from a season ago, they did not have a good record. They had a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. Matthew Stafford missed a couple of games, or at least a couple of games worth of snaps, with injuries and stuff like that. Kenny Golladay, the number one weapon, was down. You would say the Lions did not have a top or a very good passing attack a season ago, but in fact, you would be incorrect. The Lions had a top 10 passing attack in 2020, ranking number 10 in yards and ranking number 13 in touchdowns scored, with your three leading wide receivers being Marvin Jones, Danny Amendola, and Quintez Cephus. Now, could you imagine, picture this for a second. Could you imagine the Lions going into the 2020 season with a wide receiver core consisting of your number one guy is a player that is very good, a very solid wide receiver, but a wide receiver that nobody considers to be a number one guy, a wide receiver that nobody considers to be a dominant X wide receiver. That's what Marvin Jones is. Marvin Jones is a very good wide receiver. He's a guy that is not truly a number one, not necessarily a dominant X wide receiver, but a very talented guy nonetheless. Probably one of the better number twos in the NFL. Could you imagine if a year ago the Lions walked into the 2020 season with that guy being their number one player, with their number two wide receiver being a player that is okay, a really solid player, really good all around, creates solid separation, isn't really elite at everything, isn't really great at anything, but is just an all around solid player. And then their third wide receiver being a guy that was a day 3 pick, a player that wasn't even good enough to go in the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft. If the Lions went into the 2020 season with that roster a season ago, with that receiving core a season ago, they would have been eaten alive. They would have been, laughed at. They would have been mocked. They would have had all the jokes thrown at them here and there and all around. And yet, that's the exact wide receiver core. That's the exact wide receiver core and the exact top 3 that they went into the season a year ago with. And they walked out as a top 10 passing offense without Kenny Golladay. Tyrell Williams and Marvin Jones are very similar players. Neither of them are true number one wide receivers in my opinion. Neither of them are true dominant X number one wide receivers that are going to dominate every single Sunday. And yet Marvin Jones was our number one wide receiver a season ago with 900 plus yards and 9 touchdowns, putting up borderline wide receiver 1 numbers, just like Tyrell Williams has done several times before. Quintez Cephus and Danny Amendola, that connection selection is pretty similar as well. Both of them are kind of underrated. Both of them are guys that are really good at a lot of things. Both guys that can create separation, but guys that aren't really the greatest athletes, guys that aren't really the fastest, the biggest, or the strongest, but guys that just play very well fundamentally, guys that create solid separation, and guys that are good, solid players, but don't have anything elite or anything great about them. And then Quintez Cephus and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Quintez Cephus, of course, from a season ago, and Amon-Ra right now, both being day 3 picks going into the NFL, both being guys that are underrated, not being talked about, and yet guys that are definitely undervalued in their draft class, and guys that can come out and far exceed where they were drafted and far exceed the expectations set upon them by their draft stock. The Lions are literally going into the 2021 season with the exact same formula and the exact same weapons that they did a season ago. The names may be different, but the skill sets are exactly the same. The situations are exactly the same. And you might say, okay, well, the Lions last year also had Marvin Hall, a deep threat guy, a guy that's not going to get a lot of targets, but a guy that nonetheless, any given play can break you off a big time touchdown. A guy that can get you a 30, 40, 50-yard big play bomb down the field, a big-time game-changing touchdown. If only the Lions had a guy like that. If only the Lions had a guy that was a little inconsistent with his hands, a guy that isn't really great, but a guy that has really good deep speed, a guy that is a really good deep threat, and a guy that can just any given play burst off for a huge big-time touchdown. Wouldn't that be something? Oh wait, they have Rashad Perryman. That's exactly what he does. That's his exact skill set. Those are your top 4 wide receivers for the Lions this season to go. That's not Kenny Golladay, of course, but other than Kenny Golladay, who only had 300 receiving yards, those are your top wide receivers from a season ago. All other wide receivers on the roster, including Kenny Golladay, so Kenny Golladay, Mohamed Sanu, as well as Jamal Agnew, were the only 3 wide receivers to even get a reception a season ago. They combined for a total of 605 yards and 3 touchdowns on 75 targets. Victor Bolden can very easily get 13 receptions for 89 yards to replace the production that Jamal Agnew had a season ago. And if you want to put, I think Victor Bolden could even be a guy as a dark horse to be the kick and punt returner to truly replace Jamal Agnew at pretty much every different spot. Now, Javon McKinley and Sage Surratt are both guys that went undrafted, but are both guys that are competing for roster spots. And if they end up making the team and they end up actually seeing the field, there is no reason that either one of those guys cannot get you 16 receptions for 178 yards and 1 touchdown to replace the production that Mohamed Sanu gave you a season ago. And that leaves you with just 32 targets that were left from Kenny Golladay. That leaves you with just 32 targets that were given to Kenny Golladay a season ago for, I believe, just over 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. 32 plays, 32 NFL plays, 32 snaps of the football that are not very obviously and very blatantly replaced. Guys that have not slid in. There is no guy that has slid in for Kenny Golladay, a 1-for-1 transaction that is going to give you the production that Kenny Golladay gives you and is going to be the dominant player that Kenny Golladay was for the Lions when he was healthy. However, the Lions don't need a dominant player. The Lions don't need one player to get you 32 receptions for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns to replace Kenny Golladay. If you want to split up those 32 different snaps, you give 7 of them to DeAndre Swift. Throughout an entire season, you give him 7 more carries. You give Jamal Williams 5 more carries. You give TJ Hockenson 10 more targets. And you give Quintez Cephus 10 more targets. That's your 32 right there. That is your 32 targets that were distributed to Kenny Golladay a season ago, distributed fairly evenly among 4 players on the Detroit Lions without setting unrealistic expectations. So with that being said, right, with the Lions going through all of this, showing you exactly how the Lions replaced each and every key member of their receiving core a season ago, not even talking about TJ Hockenson as a receiving threat, not even talking about Darren Fells as a red zone threat, not even talking about DeAndre Swift as a receiving threat, not even talking about, Khalif Raymond or Damian Ratley or even really a couple other younger wide receivers. Hunter Bryant is another guy in there. Not even talking about those guys. Talking just simply how the Lions replaced talent-wise each and every different role that they had a season ago. This wide receiving core is not all that different from what we saw a year ago. This wide receiver core is not all that different from the core that put up top 10 numbers a season ago as the Detroit Lions as a team that wasn't very good win-wise, was not a very successful football team, and yet the receiving core from 2020 to 2021, talent-wise, skill-wise, and really all around is very, very similar to what took the field for Detroit a year ago. Now, you may be saying, okay, well, this is a passing league. If you don't have a top 5 passing attack, you are not going to be cut out for the NFL, right? After all, the Buccaneers, the Chiefs, the Bills, and the Green Bay Packers all had top 5 passing attacks a season ago, and they were the 4 final teams in the NFL. That is true. That is true. Some very good teams have very good passing attacks. However, I'm going to list you off 5 more teams that have 2 very distinct things in common. Those 5 teams are Baltimore, Washington, Cleveland, Tennessee, and Chicago. Now, you may know one of the things that those teams have in common. All of those teams, all 5 of those teams were playoff contenders. But, everything from the 3 seed to the 7 seed, they made the playoffs all throughout the board, and they were true competitors and teams that were looked at, or not all of them, but a lot of them were looked at as teams that are true contenders in the AFC or the NFC. Cleveland looking like, being one of the better teams in the AFC right now, looking as potential Super Bowl champions. Baltimore, same thing. Washington, one of the better teams in the NFC, especially from the defensive side of the ball. Tennessee, always looked at as one of the better teams in the AFC. And then Chicago, Mitch Trubisky wasn't great, but their defense was really, really solid, right? All 5 of those teams made the playoffs. And all 5 of those teams were bottom 10 passing attacks in the NFL. Baltimore was 32nd. Baltimore was the dead last passing team in the NFL. Washington was 25th. Cleveland was 24th. Tennessee was 23rd. Chicago was 22nd. So with all of that being said, with me saying how exactly the Detroit Lions replaced all of the talent from a season ago pretty easily, like pretty directly, 1-for-1 replaced it, with you knowing that you can make the playoffs and be a very good football team without having a top 10 or a top 5 passing attack in the NFL, and the fact that we know the Lions are likely going to have better pass protection and a more balanced offense, why is wide receiver a problem? Why is wide receiver so detrimental to the Detroit Lions? Why is that one positional group a positional group that isn't all that different, nor is it all that worse from a receiving core that took the field a season ago that was a top 10 unit? Why is it such a problem? Why is it going to be so detrimental to the Lions? And why are they going to be so bad next year because of this wide receiving core? Why did the Detroit Lions need to spend big money on a wide receiver? Why did the Detroit Lions need to trade for a big name wide receiver? Why did the Detroit Lions need to spend a top 10 pick on a wide receiver in the NFL draft on a Devontae Smith or a Jalen Waddle? Why? Knowing all of that, knowing everything that we just talked about, ask yourself the question, why do the Detroit Lions need a big-time wide receiver? Why do the Detroit Lions have such a big problem at wide receiver? And why is the narrative that the Lions have such a big hole at wide receiver going to hold them back so significantly in the 2021 season? With all that being said, that is all for you guys today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day. Thank you all so very much for watching the video. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.